June Sept. 1944, off the coast of Normandy, France. The dawn fog hangs low over the grey channel. Mingling with the diesel fumes of 1,000 landing craft, Royal Navy Commander Bruce White grips the railing of his tugboat as concrete giants rise from the sea, immense hollow blocks, some 3 stories tall, being towed by tugs across the waves. Seagulls wheel above them, confused by the unnatural procession. White's men stare in disbelief. One mutters, "We're building Dover out here." These are the Phoenix caissons, each weighing over 6,000 tons, floating fortresses of reinforced concrete, cast in secrecy along Britain's southern coast. They are the backbone of an idea that Churchill once called the most audacious engineering feat of the war. Their destination, the beaches of Normandy, where the Allies have landed but have no harbour to unload their armies. The problem is brutal and simple. The Germans still control every major port in France. Cherbourg's docks are heavily mined and defended. Le Havre is still in enemy hands. Yet every day, tens of thousands of men and hundreds of tanks must be fed, fueled, and armed. Without a port, the invasion will starve on the sand. The plan, codenamed Mulberry, seems mad. Build 2 complete artificial harbours, tow them across the channel, and assemble them under fire. Concrete caissons for breakwaters, scuttled ships for shelter, floating roadways to carry trucks straight from ships to shore, modular pieces like a giant construction set, each one designed in Britain to fit the others precisely. On paper, it looks impossible. On the water, it is already taking shape. From Portsmouth to Arromanches, more than 600 components crawl across the channel like an invasion of floating monoliths. The seas are calm for now. The men hauling them know that one gale could shatter the dream before it's born. Commander White orders a course correction. A barge slews dangerously close to another. Over the radio, he hears American voices coordinating their own harbour off Omaha Beach, Mulberry, while his will anchor here. At Arromanches, as Mulberry B. By nightfall, the first line of block ships, the Gooseberry, begins to sink in place, their crews scuttling them with quiet precision. Rusting hulls of old freighters form a crescent wall against the surf. Behind them, the Phoenix caissons are manoeuvred into position, ballast tanks flooding, settling like ancient ruins onto the seabed. From the beach, British soldiers watch concrete towers vanish beneath the waves, marking the skeleton of a harbour that does not yet exist. They can't believe it will work, but within days, they'll see trucks rolling over floating bridges as if on land, somewhere inland. The guns of Cayenne thunder, and the engineers work through the night by lantern light. The tide rises, the wind builds, and the race against weather begins. White rubs the salt from his eyes and looks east. The horizon glows with the dim lights of England, the country that built a harbour in secret and sent it into battle. Night folds over the channel, and everyone knows that calm here never lasts for long. But the channel has other plans. June 19, 1944. The channel turns against them. June 19, 1944. The English Channel. In a single night, the sea changes sides. What carried them here now decides whether they are allowed to stay. 3 weeks after D-Day, the sea that had carried salvation now rises in fury. A gale from the west lashes the Normandy coast with 50-mile-an-hour winds. Commander Bruce White wakes to the shudder of metal cables snapping in the dark. The tug lurches against the surf. Men on deck scramble for the lines. "Hold her steady," he yells. Voice drowned by thunder. By sunrise, the artificial harbour Mulberry B at Arromanches is under siege not by Germans, but by the sea itself. Waves heave higher than a man, pounding the newly anchored Phoenix caissons. The floating whale roadways twist like serpents. Pontoon bridges break free and slam into landing craft. A soldier watches helplessly as a truck topples from a rolling platform into the grey foam. A few miles west, the American Mulberry at Omaha fares worse. Built in shallower water and still incomplete, it shatters. Mulberry A is gone torn apart in less than 2 days. Engineers, radio frantic messages, sections adrift. Pierheads gone. Impossible to salvage. The Atlantic wins its battle. Across southern England, shipwrights and riveters pause by factory radios. Hands still black with grease, and wonder if their secret work now lies in pieces on a foreign shore. In ports across southern England, word spreads quickly. The shipwrights of Southampton, the welders of Portsmouth, the women who riveted the Phoenix blocks, listened to the BBC reports in stunned silence. For months they had built in secrecy, never allowed to speak of what they were making, and now they wonder if their floating harbour lies broken on a foreign shore. At Arromanches, men work waist-deep in freezing surf, hammering, welding, praying. Each caisson was designed with flood valves to settle on the seabed, but the sea wants them all. Some tilt and vanish beneath the waves. Others hold, stubborn as the people who built them. Major Arromanches, the royal engineer behind the Whale bridges, records in his diary. Every tide brings wreckage, yet still they come. The harbour breathes. On the cliffs above, White watches through binoculars as the storm savages his harbour. The air tastes of salt and diesel. Each hour, the wind grows stronger. By nightfall, the order comes: abandon what can't be held. Crews cut cables, sacrifice sections to save the core. They have spent months designing perfection, and now must watch it drown. For 2 days the storm rages. Then, en June 22, the sky clears. The sea lies heavy and broken, littered with twisted steel and shattered pontoons. Arromanches still stands, battered but alive. Out on the horizon, a line of ships waits, full of tanks, fuel, and food, the army's lifeline. White knows the stakes. If the harbour fails, the Allied advance toward Caen and beyond will slow to a crawl. Cherbourg is still contested. Roads inland are mud. Every crate of ammunition, every gallon of fuel, must pass through this fragile invention. He calls his officers together. We're not losing this port. Patch every bridge. Drag every section you can. We'll rebuild faster than the sea can tear it down. His men nod, silent and exhausted. In the surf below, sparks flare again as welders set to work defying the storm's memory. By July, the miracle resumes. Ships unload directly into the floating docks. Trucks rumble ashore. The Mulberry B, now nicknamed Port Winston, handles more than 7,000 tons a day, sometimes double that when the weather holds. From these steel and concrete veins, the lifeblood of the Allied armies flows into France. But as the beachhead grows and tanks roll inland, another challenge looms, one of endurance. Not survival could a port built in days sustain an entire campaign for months. June 23, July 31. 1,944 Arromanches, Gold Beach. The storm has blown itself out, leaving a cemetery of twisted steel in the surf. At first light, Commander Bruce White steps off a launch onto a heaving pontoon. The air smells of wet hemp and hot metal. Welders' arcs spit blue fire against the grey morning. All along the line, Royal Engineers and dockers in borrowed uniforms are doing the unglamorous work of resurrection re-rigging chains, cutting away buckled spans, winching intact sections into place. A corporal from the 79th Assault Squadron of Royal Engineers thumps a spanner against a seized shackle and mutters, "Come on then. Love, back to work." The Whale floating roadways, the long, latticed ramps designed by Major Alan Beckett, had twisted but not given up. Under their deck plates sit the humble beetles, the buoyant pontoons that keep the whole causeway alive, and at the seaward end rise the Spud pierheads' boxy platforms with 4 adjustable legs that bite down into the seabed, so the pier can ride out the tide like a heron on stilts. A gale can stampede the channel. It cannot move a spud that is well set. White watches a pierhead lift and settle. Lift and settle. As an LST noses alongside to disgorge Bedford trucks, fuel bowsers, and crates of 25-pounder shells, this is what a miracle looks like after the cheering stops geometry. Leverage. Patience. Background on whale, divided by beetle, divided by spud design and roll. Some parts are gone for good. The elegant, lozenge-shaped bombardon floating breakwaters failed their exam in the gale chains torn. Units adrift. Several breaking up under the loads, and no one pretends otherwise. Over clever for a dirty sea. An older petty officer sniffs and orders more work gangs to reinforce the Phoenix caisson line with extra moorings and ballast. Engineers pump sand and shingle into the concrete giants to stop their slow, storm-loosened shuffle. The blockship Gooseberry line rusted merchantmen sunk with quiet ceremony a fortnight ago now serves as the outer baffle while the Phoenixes take the real punch. Storm impact and bombardment weaknesses noted by contemporary engineering records. By the end of June, the harbour has its rhythm back. A Liberty ship arrives on the flood and is warped onto a pierhead as if into a city berth. Winches screech. Crates swing. A driver from the RASC sits white-knuckled behind the wheel of a 3-tonner, waiting for the signal. The whale under him rises 6 feet with the tide. The spud beyond him stays as steady as a quayside, somewhere beneath. Beetles creak like old furniture. A green flag flicks. Low gear. The truck crawls forward, rolls over a mile of floating roadway, and kisses French sand. He lets out a breath he didn't know he was holding. Statistics are just ink until you stand on a floating roadway and feel a continent rolling forward beneath your boots. Through July, the numbers climb from respectable to astonishing, with American salvage sent over from the wrecked Omaha Harbor. Port Winston grows a second wind. On steady days, it pushes about 6. 750 tons ashore ammunition. Pole. Rations. Bailey Bridge panels matching the planner's target despite the storm's mauling. On its best day, 29 July, 1944, the harbour lands 11. 491 tons. In the week ending 31 July, 043 tons rattle across its floating streets. The figures look absurd until you stand here and feel the deck plates hum under a queue of loaded lorries. It isn't only tonnage, it's tempo. Ships no longer idle at anchor praying for a lull. The pierheads take them day and night, in weather that would shut a peacetime port. Anti-aircraft gunners lounge beside their Bofors on the Phoenix tops, bored more often than not now that the Luftwaffe seldom dares daylight. Beach groups clear jams with a choreography learned the hard way in June marshalling officers with paddles. Royal Navy beachmasters barking short words that carry in the wind. The Mulberry breathes flood, brings ships in. Ebb takes empties oat. The line never sleeps. Arromanches defences and AA detachments. Harbour routine. Every crate has a second life before it's even set down. A can of petrol is a night's march for an armoured brigade. A crate of 17-pounder AP shot is a German Panther that will never reach a hedgerow. The quietest loads mean the loudest days inland rolls of signal cable, medical stores, spare track links, tins of comparations that taste of cardboard but keep a rifleman on his feet. Men who will never fire a shot in anger make war possible with slings, knots, and grease guns. Word of the harbour's recovery filters back across the water. In pub corners in Portsmouth, shipwrights, nurse pints, and pretend not to listen. When a man from the yard says he's heard his sections, Phoenix took the weather and kept her feet. In a Southampton kitchen, a woman who riveted beetle pontoons hangs a fresh wash and smiles when the BBC voice mentions considerable quantities successfully discharged at an artificial port. The home front learns only hints, and that is enough. Home front perspective, secrecy and morale notes. By late July, Port Winston is more than a stopgap. It's a machine for winning a battle of distance. The planner's nightmare, no deep-water harbour in Allied hands, has become a manageable inconvenience. Cherbourg is limping back to usefulness under American repair parties. But until it truly wakes, this place of concrete, sunburn, and diesel holds the line. Logistics officers start to ask a new kind of question. Not can we keep the beachhead alive, but can we feed a breakout if the causeways can keep pace? The armoured divisions massing west of St. Lo will drink the channel dry. White stands at the end of a Spud pierhead at dusk and watches a Liberty ship warp off on the ebb, her cranes folded like resting wings. Behind him, the Whale roadway stretches away, spotted with puddles, shining with spilled oil, alive with the thrum of trucks disappearing into Norman twilight. It'll do, he says to no one in particular. The question is no longer whether they can land it, but whether the wheels can turn fast enough when the door ahead blows open. It will more than do. Inland. The Americans are about to tear a hole in the German line Operation Cobra, and the question shifts from, can we land it to, can we move it fast enough to ride a breakthrough, July 25. 1944 St. Lo. Normandy. The thunder on land now rivals the one that once came from the sea. American artillery shakes the hedgerows. The night sky pulses orange. Operation Cobra, the breakout, has begun. A column of Sherman's noses forward through dust, and behind them, a river of fuel trucks, ammunition lorries, and ambulances feeds the advance. Every crate, every shell, every jerrycan has crossed the channel through Port Winston, back at Arromanches. Commander Bruce White reads the day's dispatches under the glow of a hurricane lamp. The harbour is quieter now, no guns, only the low groan of winches, but its decks are never empty. Ships still arrive, their holds packed for the next phase bridging equipment. Radio phones, mobile kitchens. The crews know the stakes if the harbour slows. The breakout stalls. A petty officer chalks figures on a blackboard nailed to a phoenix wall. Tonnage today, 830 tons. He taps the chalk once, satisfied. In the mess tent, someone reads a scrap of newsprint about the Americans reaching Coutances. That's our fuel. They're burning. Another man grins. Beyond Arromanches, a second miracle takes shape. Engineers lay a pipeline across the seabed. Operation PLUTO. Pipeline under the ocean. Flexible lead-wrapped hoses unspool from reels aboard cable ships, stretching from the Isle of Wight to Cherbourg. Soon petrol will flow beneath the waves. One continuous artery feeding Patton's tanks. What began as boxes and pontoons now evolves into infrastructure ports, pipelines, depots, all sprung from one idea that victory requires logistics as daring as combat. By August, Normandy hums like a machine. Convoys thunder inland. Engineers rebuild rail lines. Mulberry's cranes swing day and night. The Allies pour through the gap at Arromanches, racing toward Paris. In London, the planners who once feared disaster watch the numbers climb past 2 million tons landed over the beaches. The Channel, once a barrier, has become a bridge. White walks the piers one last time before his transfer home. The air smells of tar and salt. Gulls wheel over the blockships. He runs a hand along a rusting railing streaked with oil and says quietly, "We built a port from nothing, and from it came everything." On the horizon, Liberty ships wait their turn. Engines idling in the haze. The tide begins to rise again. When the campaign moved east, the Mulberry at Arromanches kept working until winter. Its battered bones still serving small coasters, even after the ports of France reopened. Decades later, fragments of the Phoenix caissons still stand offshore, monuments of concrete and tide, silent as the men who built them. And on calm mornings, when fishermen steer between the old hulks, they say you can still hear the faint clang of a hammer and the echo of a voice calling, "Hold her steady." 80 years later, the shapes of those Phoenix caissons still rise from the tide like pieces of an ancient myth, children climb them at low water. Not knowing they once carried a nation's hope, rust and barnacles have claimed their edges, but their purpose endures proof that the impossible often begins as an act of stubborn faith. History remembers the victories that roared Normandy, Sobra, Paris, yet it quietly depends on the things that did not roar the men who measured tides. Mixed concrete, tightened bolts in the rain. The Mulberry Harbors were never meant to be beautiful. They were meant to work. And in that plain success lies something profoundly human, the belief that endurance itself can be a form of courage. When we look at those ruined breakwaters today, it's tempting to see relics, but they are also reminders that great endeavours are rarely born of certainty. That audacity is not noise, but patience. The British engineers, soldiers, and civilians who built Mulberry proved that victory is less about strength than about preparation and imagination, joined together under pressure. If there is a lesson buried in that concrete, it might be this: the world is often saved not by the grand gesture, but by the quiet labour done long before anyone is watching. A blueprint drawn at midnight, a welder's steady hand, a commander's refusal to quit when the sea rises. Standing on the beach at Arromanches today, you can trace the line of the old harbour across the glittering channel, the same waters that once divided, now reflecting the unity that crossed them, and perhaps, if you listen closely enough, you'll hear what the waves are still saying: build, endure, and never assume that the tide is stronger than the will of those who face it. The legacy of Mulberry did not end with the war. Its modular vision steel, concrete, an imagination combined in motion, reshaped how the world built after peace returned. Engineers who had assembled Phoenix caissons later applied the same principles to rebuild bombed ports from Antwerp to Singapore. Civil engineers studied Mulberry as a blueprint for modern floating docks, offshore oil terminals, and even early space-age modular architecture. The PLUTO pipeline became the ancestor of 1,000 underwater arteries that now lace the globe. What once carried fuel for tanks now carries data, light, and connection between continents. The quiet inventiveness of 1944 became the foundation of a networked planet. Standing on the cliffs above Arromanches today, you can see the old concrete hulks lying half buried in sand, and just beyond them fibre-optic cables stretching unseen beneath the same sea. The lines between past and present blur. The idea endures when nations choose to build instead of destroy. Even war's inventions can become bridges toward peace.